Ever wanted to, wrap your head around a huge chunk of history, like 1,000 years maybe, without just drowning in dates and names?
Yeah, it's a common problem.
Yeah.
Especially in eras spanning continents, multiple cultures. It gets overwhelming fast.
Well, that's exactly what we're tackling today. We're doing a deep dive using a truly monumental source, Will Durant's The Story of Civilization.
Ah, Durant.
Specifically Volume 4, The Age of Faith. And monumental is, not an exaggeration, this one volume, over 1,200 pages.
It's hefty.
We actually had a listener tell us they spent over 400 hours listening to the whole series in their car. Can you imagine?
Wow, that's dedication. But it speaks to the ambition of the work. It really was an incredible undertaking, especially for the time. And as we'll get into, it wasn't just Will Durant. His wife Ariel was a crucial partner.
Right. And it's fascinating how Durant takes this period, the one everyone calls the Dark Ages, and just flips the script. He shows how vibrant it actually was.
Absolutely. Full of achievements people often overlook.
So, our mission today, for you listening, is to navigate this vast historical landscape. The Age of Faith covers medieval civilization, basically from Constantine around 325 AD, all the way up to Dante in 1309.
A massive sweep.
Yeah. You've given us this incredible resource, Durant's work, and we're going to pull out the key insights, the surprising bits. Durant himself says it's not one story, right?
Exactly. He emphasizes that it's distinct civilizations, Byzantine, Islamic, Jewish, all existing alongside and interacting with Latin Christendom.
So we're aiming to give you a clear, engaging picture of what was really happening across the Western world then. Forget some of the old assumptions. Get ready for some aha moments.
It's worth pausing on the Durants themselves for a second. Will and Ariel. This whole story of civilization was this massive joint effort.
And incredibly successful. They won a Pulitzer Prize, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Right. It shows the scale of their achievement, making dense history accessible.
So what made their approach so unique, beyond just the sheer size of it? You mentioned it was a brilliant survey.
Well, the goal was total synthesis, covering Western civilization from its roots, its Oriental heritage, as Durant put it, up to Napoleon. Arts, philosophy, everything.
He promised never a boring moment. A bold claim for history.
He mostly pulled it off. But more than that, he had this knack for these ironic but always wisely humane perspectives, as he called them, looking at the human condition through history.
And challenging that Dark Ages label head on.
Definitely. He highlights periods of great science, genuine golden ages of philosophy, economy, literature, especially in the Islamic world, which wasn't always the focus back when he was writing, particularly in the 1940s.
That's why this kind of deep dive is so useful, isn't it? Like that listener trying to read this, huge stack of tomes, as Durant might say. It's just a lot.
It can be completely overwhelming, yeah.
So this way, it's like having a guide, someone pointing out the must-know parts. A shortcut to being really well-informed without committing 400 hours in the car.
Exactly. Getting the gist and the key insights.
Okay, so let's start our journey. We'll begin in the East with the Byzantine Empire. The enduring one.
Right. Centered on Constantinople.
Dedicated as the capital in 330 AD. Durant sees this as the official end of paganism in the East, the start of the Middle Ages of triumphant faith there.
And Constantinople became enormous, a real powerhouse. It grew rapidly, almost 1 million people at its height.
1 million? Back then?
Yeah, a bustling, diverse metropolis, truly rivaling places like Baghdad or Cordova in its prime. It was the new Rome, strategically vital.
And imperial power was concentrated there. Justinian's reign is a key example. Huge building projects.
Like rebuilding the Hagia Sophia after the Nika riots, a massive undertaking.
But maybe his biggest legacy was legal, the Corpus Juris Civilis.
Oh, absolutely. Often just called the Code of Justinian. It's incredible how it preserved Roman law for 1,000 years.
1,000 years.
And then it directly influenced European law when it was rediscovered and studied intensely from the 12th century onwards. It's foundational for many modern legal systems.
So Justinian's code wasn't just for Byzantium, it echoed through Europe centuries later.
Exactly. And beyond the capital, the empire adapted. They created these administrative units called themes.
Themes, like military districts?
Pretty much. They combined civil and military authority, allowing for more local self-government and resilience, especially as they faced the growing Islamic caliphates. It helped the provinces prosper, even when the capital struggled.
And the art was distinctive, too. Somberly brilliant, Durant calls it.
Yes, very unique. You see influences from Sasanian Persia, Nestorian Syria, Coptic Egypt, a real blend.
Less focus on realism, more on color, domes, intricate patterns.
Right. Rich ornamentation, vaults, domes. It had a different feel from classical Greek or Roman art.
Just
More stylized, more symbolic, maybe.
which leads to that fascinating period, the iconoclastic movement, banning religious images.
From 726 to 842, roughly. A huge internal conflict over the use of icons.
But Durant points out an ironic consequence.
Yeah, it's a great observation. By banning religious art, he argues, it kind of freed the artist from a monotonous confinement within ecclesiastical themes.
So artists started painting other things.
Exactly. Secular subjects gained ground, imperial life, history, animals, plants. It shows how even strict rules can sometimes, unexpectedly, open up new creative avenues.
The empire wasn't just culturally rich, it was militarily strong for a long time anyway. Nicephorus II, for instance.
A major figure. He drove the Muslims out of Crete in 961. A huge strategic win.
And then kept going.
Oh yeah. Took Aleppo, Cyprus, Antioch by 968. Durant says these victories basically shattered the Abbasid Caliphate for a time, really shifted the balance of power.
But this strength had a brutal side too, Basil the sect.
Basil Bulgaroctonus, the Bulgar Slayer.
That nickname says it all.
It really does. After a major victory in 1014, the story goes he blinded 15,000 Bulgar prisoners,
15,000.
leaving just one eye for every 100 men so they could lead the others home. It's horrific, but it paints a grim picture of the era's warfare. Utterly ruthless.
But even with leaders like Basil, the empire eventually weakened after him.
It did. Corruption crept in, selling offices became common, officials were found with huge amounts of embezzled silver. The internal strength began to fray after that peak.
Okay, let's pivot now. From the Byzantine East to the Islamic world during this same period, which was, just vast.
Truly vast. Geographically, intellectually, stretching from Spain to India, it really was a golden age in many respects, though also marked by conflict.
The cities alone sound incredible. Baghdad in the 10th century, possibly the biggest city on earth.
Estimates range from 800,000 up to maybe 2 million people. A true world capital. Descriptions mention splendid mansions, the royal palace having something like 22,000 carpets and 38,000 tapestries.
Just staggering wealth.
Mind-boggling displays of luxury and power.
And then Cairo rose up too, rivaling Baghdad later on.
Yeah, one account from the mid-11th century talks about 20,000 houses, 5 or 6 stories high, and 20,000 shops.
Shops filled with what?
So much gold jewelry, apparently, that there was no room to sit down. Gives you a sense of the commercial vibrancy.
And economically, they were innovators, weren't they? Introducing new crops to Europe.
Huge impact. Rice, sugarcane, citrus fruits, cotton leaves spread westward through Islamic lands, plus advanced metallurgy. Think of the famous Toledo steel swords.
Right. And a massive merchant fleet.
Over 1,000 ships connecting this vast trading network.
This economic engine must have fueled incredible intellectual life. Baghdad's House of Wisdom.
Absolutely pivotal. A major translation center. They systematically translated ancient Greek, Syriac, Persian, Pahlavi, Indian Sanskrit texts into Arabic, preserving knowledge that might have been lost.
And they valued this work highly. That story about the translator Hunayn ibn Ishaq.
Being paid in gold, literally the weight of the books he translated. It shows an immense respect for scholarship.
But it's interesting what they chose not to translate or what didn't catch on.
Right. Greek science and philosophy were eagerly absorbed, but Greek poetry, drama, history, largely ignored. Durant notes. Different cultural priorities, perhaps.
So let's talk science and medicine. This is where they were really leading, wasn't it?
Unquestionably. Astronomy saw huge leaps. Figures like Al-Khwarizmi, whose name gave us algorithm, and Al-Biruni, Ibn Yunus, Al-Batruji, they were making calculations and observations that laid groundwork for Copernicus centuries later.
Changing how we saw the universe.
And physics, too. Al-Cassini was working on ideas about universal gravitation, refining laws of mechanics, like the lever.
And medicine, especially eyes.
Ophthalmology was a major specialty. They achieved a level of sophistication unmatched in Europe at the time, but beyond specialties, they established these incredible hospitals.
Immense hospitals, Durant says.
Like Nuruddin's in Damascus or the Maristana Mansour in Cairo. What's really striking is that these places offered free treatment and drugs to everyone, often for centuries.
Free healthcare back then. That's amazing.
Yeah, a real commitment to public welfare and medical knowledge. It's quite profound when you think about the context.
And literature, we all know The Thousand Nights and a Night.
Alf Layla wa Layla.
Yeah.
Hugely popular collection of stories, but poetry was perhaps even more central.
Durant makes a huge claim about poets.
He says probably no civilization ever equaled Abbasid Islam in the number and prosperity of its bards. Poetry was everywhere, highly valued, lavishly rewarded.
And philosophy was thriving too, though, with some tension. Avicenna, Averroes.
Major figures, Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd. Averroes, interestingly, ended up having more influence later in Christian Europe than within Islam itself.
Why was that? Persecution.
Yeah, his rationalist approach faced backlash from more orthodox elements, which leads to figures like Al-Ghazali.
Who pushed back against pure rationalism.
Exactly. Al-Ghazali led a powerful return to orthodoxy and Sufi mysticism. His work was immensely influential, sort of turning the tide against philosophical skepticism within Islam, emphasizing faith and spiritual experience.
So even within this golden age, there were serious internal struggles. The early caliphate sounds pretty rough. Assassinations.
Very tumultuous early years, yes. Power struggles were frequent and often bloody.
And massive slave revolts. The servile wars.
Particularly the Zanj rebellion near Basra, led by Ali ibn Muhammad, involving hundreds of thousands of East African slaves working in brutal conditions, digging saltpeter.
How serious was it?
Extremely. It lasted about 14 years, involved horrific massacres. Durant mentions 300,000 people killed in one instance, and seriously threatened the stability of the Abbasid Caliphate. It shows deep social fissures.
And then there were radical sects like the Ismailis.
Yes, an offshoot of Shia Islam. Some groups were highly secretive, others openly revolutionary, like the Carmathians or Carmatians.
They did something pretty shocking in Mecca, didn't they?
Astonishing. In 930, they sacked Mecca during the Hajj pilgrimage, massacred pilgrims, and carried off the Black Stone from the Kaaba itself.
Wow. Took the Black Stone.
Held at ransom for years, a profound sacrilege demonstrating their power and defiance.
And socially, practices like veiling women.
Purdah, the seclusion and veiling of women, became more widespread and formalized during this period, particularly among the upper classes. The harem system also developed. Women's lives became more restricted in the public sphere compared to earlier times.
Okay, shifting focus again. Let's talk about medieval Judaism, often living within or between these larger Christian and Islamic realms.
A fascinating position, a period of incredible scholarship and cultural resilience, but also, sadly, marked by persistent persecution.
They were truly the people of the book, right? Torah-centric?
Absolutely. The Torah, the written law, was central. But equally important was the oral law, the ongoing interpretation by rabbis who acted as teachers, judges, community leaders.
And this interpretation led to the Talmud.
Exactly. The Talmud is this vast compilation of legal discussion, ethical teachings, legends, even practical advice. A true encyclopedia of Jewish life and thought developed over centuries.
Covering everything. Like medicine.
Yeah, Durant notes it, discusses things like hemophilia, recognizing its hereditary nature. And of course, detailed dietary laws, no pork, separating meat and dairy. Even hygiene tips.
Hygiene tips.
Like what? Well, there's a mention that lingering in the privy might actually lengthen your life. Maybe an early hint about the benefits of quiet contemplation. Or just good plumbing.
Haha, okay. So beyond the texts, family life was crucial.
The saving center, Durant calls it. Even hostile observers noted the warmth and dignity, thoughtfulness, consideration, parental and fraternal affection within Jewish families. It was a source of strength against external pressures.
And education was highly valued.
Extremely. Synagogue schools for basic literacy, yeshivas for higher rabbinic learning. This generally led to higher literacy rates among Jewish men, comparatively, than among their Christian neighbors at the time.
It's interesting about music in the synagogue, though. Initially frowned upon.
Yes, as a sign of mourning for the lost temple and homeland. Public rejoicing felt inappropriate. But gradually, music came back, especially through the chanting of prayers and religious poetry, sometimes even adopting patterns from surrounding cultures, like Christian plain chant.
And this environment produced some intellectual giants. Maimonides is probably the most famous.
Moses ben Maimon, yes. A towering figure, physician, philosopher, legal codifier. He served as physician to Saladin's vizier in Egypt.
And he tried to bridge faith and reason.
Exactly. His Guide for the Perplexed sought to reconcile Jewish theology with Aristotelian philosophy. It had a huge impact, not just in Judaism, but also influencing Christian thinkers like Thomas Aquinas.
But there were other intellectual currents too, right? The Kabbalah?
Yes, a mystical tradition, esoteric interpretations of the Torah. It gained enormous popularity, sometimes rivaling the Talmud's influence in certain communities, offered a different path to religious experience.
Durant seemed a bit skeptical. Brilliant nonsense.
He acknowledged its depth and influence, but was wary of some of its more, let's say, elaborate or less rational aspects. It shows the diversity within Jewish thought, rational philosophy, alongside deep mysticism.
Which brings us, unfortunately, to the adversity they faced. Persecution was a constant threat.
A grim reality. Horrific accusations like ritual murder, the infamous blood libel. Public burnings of the Talmud Louis IX ordered one in Paris in 1242.
And outright expulsions.
Yes, periodic expulsions from various regions. Durant mentions Aragon in 1247, where over 100,000 Jews were forced to leave, taking their valuable commercial and technical skills with them. A loss for everyone, really.
Was there any protection? What about the papacy?
It was complicated and inconsistent. Some popes, like Gregory the Great way back, explicitly protected Jewish rights, forbade forced conversions. They saw Jews as witnesses to Christian truth, needing preservation.
But others were hostile.
Very. Innocent III, a powerful pope in the early 13th century, imposed harsh restrictions. He mandated the distinctive Jewish badge, ghettoization in some areas, and famously declared Jews doomed to perpetual servitude for rejecting Christ. So the church's position could swing dramatically.
Okay, our final civilization. Latin Christendom, Western Europe. Moving out of what we think of as the early Middle Ages towards something new.
Right. And the church is absolutely central here, the main organizing force in people's lives.
Providing structure, meaning.
And as Durant puts it, the faith and hope that inspired and canceled death, a powerful psychological and social anchor in a difficult world.
With a complex structure of its own. Priests, bishops.
Archbishops, patriarchs, and crucially, the growing power and claim to supremacy of the Pope in Rome. This papal authority became increasingly asserted, especially after Pope Leo I in the 5th century got imperial backing.
But the church faced internal problems too, simony.
A huge issue. The buying and selling of church offices
Yeah.
and clerical marriage, or concubinage, which was widespread despite rules about celibacy. Reform movements constantly battled these.
Led by figures like Leo IX, Gregory VII, the Gregorian Reform.
Exactly. Major pushback against corruption, trying to enforce celibacy, and asserting the church's independence from secular rulers. A long, ongoing struggle.
And this era also saw new religious movements, new monastic orders.
Yes, the Franciscans and Dominicans emerged in the 13th century. Mendicant orders focused on poverty, preaching, working among the people.
Offering a cleansing example, Durant says.
Yeah, a contrast to the wealth and power some parts of the church had accumulated. They represented a powerful spiritual renewal.
And then the Crusades, a defining feature of this period for Christendom.
Undeniably.
Yeah.
Though Durant highlights the often brutal reality behind the pious justifications.
But he gives that fascinating example of Frederick II.
Right, the Holy Roman Emperor. He's been excommunicated by the Pope. Multiple times, actually.
Not exactly the poster child for a crusade leader.
Yeah. Not at all. Yet he goes to the Holy Land, and instead of just fighting, he negotiates with the Egyptian Sultan, Al-Kamil.
A nephew of Saladin, right?
Yes, and they work out a treaty. Frederick gets Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth back for the Christians mostly. The Temple Mount remained under Muslim control.
Achieved through diplomacy, not war, while excommunicated.
Exactly. A rare moment, Durant suggests, of mutual understanding and respect between these leaders from warring cultures. Of course, the Pope hated it, denounced the treaty because it wasn't won by conquest, and Frederick was still excommunicating. But it's a remarkable story.
It really complicates the simple narrative of the Crusades. Meanwhile, back in Europe, feudal society had its own harsh realities. Punishments were severe.
Barbarously severe, is Durant's phrase. Fines for everything imaginable. Public humiliation was common, the pillory, ducking stools, flogging, branding.
And mutilation, William the Conqueror.
His decree is chilling. Instead of execution for certain crimes, he ordered eyes plucked out, hands, feet, even testicles cut off. The idea was the living, mutilated body served as a more potent warning.
Grim. And torture wasn't always common, but came back.
It had largely faded in early feudalism, but was revived, particularly in the 13th century, often in conjunction with legal inquiries, especially heresy investigations.
So much for the ideal of chivalry.
Well, the ideal existed: knights, jousts, tournaments, codes of conduct. But Durant contrasts it sharply with the often sullied reality.
How so?
He describes knights who could be faithless murderers, who'd strike down unarmed peasants, rob churches, and display a crudeness and cruelty that apparently shocked even their Saracen opponents during the Crusades. A big gap between the romantic image and the behavior.
Yet, amidst all this, Europe's economy was changing. Cities were growing.
Definitely. An economic and urban revival was underway. Places like Bruges and Flanders became major commercial centers. The Hanseatic League formed in Northern Europe, a powerful alliance of trading cities controlling roads in the Baltic and North Seas.
Acting almost like a state itself.
In many ways, yes. Making treaties, waging war, and financial innovations were spreading too.
Banking. Letters of credit.
Things like letters of credit, bills of exchange techniques known earlier to Jewish and Muslim merchants became more common, making long-distance trade much easier and safer. A huge boost to commerce.
But this created new social divisions. The rise of the merchant class.
The mercantile bourgeoisie, yes. They gained political power in the towns, but often used it to their advantage. Durant notes they tended to eliminate the poor from assemblies or offices, and could be harsh on manual workers and peasants. New hierarchies formed.
And the population was actually growing.
Significantly, yes. After declines in the earlier medieval period, Europe's population grew substantially between about 1,000 and 1,300. Cities expanded. Paris might have reached 100,000, maybe 150,000 people by the late 13th century.
Alongside this economic shift, there was an intellectual boom, too.
A major awakening. Cathedral schools like the ones at Chartres in France or York in England became important centers of learning.
And these led to universities.
Exactly. Universities started emerging as more formalized institutions, often growing out of these schools or guilds of students and masters. Bologna, Padua in Italy, Paris, Oxford, Naples, Rome, drawing students from all over Europe.
Creating a new intellectual landscape.
And producing major thinkers. Peter Abelard, famous for his logic and controversial life, really pushed for using reason to understand faith. He argued scriptural truths shouldn't contradict reason.
And then Thomas Aquinas.
The giant of scholastic philosophy. His massive Summa Theologica aimed to synthesize Christian doctrine with the philosophy of Aristotle, which was being rediscovered via Arabic and Jewish scholars. A monumental attempt to reconcile faith and reason, becoming hugely influential.
But with this strengthening of faith and institutions came a harder line on dissent. Heresy.
Yes. The Church, especially as it became more organized and powerful, viewed heresy not just as religious error, but as treason against God and the social order, which were seen as intertwined.
Groups like the Cathars or Albigensians were seen as a major threat.
A huge threat, particularly in southern France. They had alternative doctrines, rejected the church hierarchy, called the Roman Church the whore in Babylon, mocked relics, had their own clergy, seen as a pestilential error that needed rooting out.
And they were suppressed violently.
Suppressed with the sword, as Durant puts it. The Albigensian Crusade in the early 13th century was brutal, and this period saw the formalization of the Inquisition.
To deal with heresy systematically.
Initially, it was more bishops handling it locally, but it became more centralized under the papacy, often entrusted to the Dominicans. Procedures were established, sometimes involving torture, leading to orders to find and exterminate heretics. Book burnings, including the Talmud again, became tools of control.
It leads back to that chilling Durant quote.
Intolerance is the natural concomitant of strong faith. Tolerance grows only when faith loses certainty. Certainty is murderous. A very stark observation about the dangers of absolute conviction when combined with power.
So, pulling all these threads together, Byzantine, Islamic, Jewish, Latin Christian, what's the big picture? Constant conflict, yes, but also
profound interaction and influence. Despite the wars and tensions, these cultures were constantly borrowing from each other, learning from each other, sometimes grudgingly.
Like the Arabic influence on European science and medicine we talked about.
Exactly, and philosophy via translations. Even things like musical instruments, the lute, the rebec, maybe even the guitar, have roots in the Islamic world. Troubadour poetry in France likely drew inspiration from Muslim Spain. It's like a complex web of exchange.
And Durant's overall perspective offers some timeless wisdom, doesn't it?
I think so. Those meta-observations he makes are powerful. Like, it is reserved to the philosopher and forbidden to the man of action to see elements of justice in the position of his enemy. It forces you to think about perspective and conflict.
Or his comment about managing people versus managing things.
Right. Under every system of economy, men who can manage, men manage men who can only manage things. A pretty cynical but perhaps realistic view of power dynamics that holds true across different systems. His whole approach, striving for completeness with those wisely humane perspectives, gives you insights into human nature that feel relevant even now.
So we've taken a whirlwind tour through Durant's Age of Faith, from Constantinople to Cairo, Cordoba to Paris, uncovering the complexities often hidden by that simple term, dark ages.
Hopefully, you listening feel better equipped now, having gotten a shortcut to the core of Durant's massive work. It was far richer, far more dynamic, and yes, often far more brutal than commonly portrayed.
But Durant himself leaves us with a challenge, doesn't he? About the limits of our knowledge.
He does. Reflecting on documenting Muslim thought, he says, what we know is a fragment of what survives. What survives is a fragment of what was produced. What appears in these pages is a morsel of a fraction of a fragment.
It makes you think, doesn't it? How much history is lost.
Exactly. He wonders what other half-forgotten legacies are out there waiting for scholarship. What discoveries might completely change our view of any period we think we understand, whether we call it a golden age or a dark age.
What other incredible achievements are buried? It's a humbling thought.
It certainly is. A reminder to stay curious.
So if this deep dive has piqued your curiosity, definitely consider exploring more of Durant, or pick one of these areas: Byzantium, Islamic science, Maimonides, the rise of universities, and dig deeper yourself.
There's always more to uncover.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep digging into the stories that shape our world.